July 7, 1968. Wells Restaurant, Harlem. Bumpy Johnson collapsed from a heart attack while eating breakfast. He was 62 years old. 3 days later, his funeral drew thousands. Politicians, jazz musicians, and community leaders filled the room. Standing in the back, trying not to be noticed, was Frank Lucas. Frank had not been seen in Harlem for 3 years. Most people believed he was dead. But there he was, waiting until everyone else had paid their respects. Then he walked to the casket, knelt down, and whispered something no one else could hear. It was an apology to a dead man for something that happened in 1965. Something so devastating that Frank Lucas, who would later build a heroin empire, making $1 million a day, ever forgot it. Something that made him flee Harlem for 3 years and only returned when he knew Bumpy Johnson could no longer punish him. This is the story of what Bumpy did to Frank Lucas, a lesson that even an American gangster was too afraid to reveal. To understand what Frank whispered at that funeral, you have to go back 3 years to 1965, to the moment Frank Lucas made the biggest mistake of his life. Frank Lucas was born in North Carolina in 1930. He came to Harlem in 1946, 16 years old, with nothing but ambition and anger. He worked his way up through the ranks, running numbers, providing protection, doing muscle work. By the early 1960s, he was making decent money, but decent was not enough. Frank wanted wealth. He wanted power. He wanted to matter. In 1964, Frank went to Vietnam not as a soldier, but as a businessman. He saw an opportunity no one else did. The war had created a drug pipeline from Southeast Asia to America, controlled entirely by the Italian mafia. They bought heroin from the Golden Triangle, cut it repeatedly, and sold it for enormous profit. Frank asked himself, why pay middlemen? Why not go straight to the source? He made connections in Thailand, negotiated directly with suppliers, arranged for pure heroin to be smuggled back to the United States in the coffins of dead American soldiers. It was bold, ruthless, and about to make him millions when Frank returned to Harlem in early 1965. He was ready to change the drug game. He had the purest product in New York. He could undercut the Italian mob's prices and still earn a fortune. He had chosen his territory, 116th Street, the heart of Harlem. There was only one problem: Bumpy Johnson. In 1965, Bumpy Johnson was 59 years old. He had ruled Harlem for 20 years. He controlled the numbers, ran the protection rackets, settled disputes, and most importantly, enforced one unbreakable rule: no hard drugs in Harlem. Bumpy had seen what heroin did to communities. He had watched it destroy families in Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia. He had seen children become addicts, mothers lose their sons, and neighborhoods decay from within. He made a promise to Harlem: not here, not in his neighborhood. Everyone operating in Harlem knew the rule. The Italian mob respected it. They sold heroin everywhere else in New York, but not in Bumpy's territory. Local dealers knew it. Even the police knew it. If you worked in Harlem, you followed Bumpy's rules. But Frank Lucas did not care about rules. He cared about money. He set up his operation quietly. He made no announcements, no advertisements. He simply began moving product through a network of young dealers desperate enough to take the risk. Within 2 weeks, Frank was making $50,000, a weak and unbelievable amount in 1965. He was selling pure heroin. He called it blue magic. Priced so low that the Italian mob's cut product looked worthless by comparison. Customers came from all over the city, and word spread quickly. It took exactly 12 days for Bumpy Johnson to hear about it. Bumpy did not show up with guns and did not send a message through violence. He did something far more intimidating. He invited Frank to lunch. They met at Wells Restaurant, the same place where Bumpy would die 3 years later. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, just the two of them sitting at a corner table. Bumpy ordered breakfast food, even though it was 2 in the afternoon. Frank ordered coffee, too nervous to eat. "I hear you've been busy," Bumpy said, cutting into his eggs. Frank tried to stay calm. "Just trying to make a living, Mr. Johnson." "Making a living is fine, Frank. I respect that," Bumpy replied. "But you're selling heroin on 116th Street in my neighborhood." "It's good business," Frank said. "People want it. I'm just providing a service." B set his fork down. His voice remained calm, but something in his eyes changed. "Frank, I'm going to give you some advice, and I'm only going to say it once. Stop selling that poison in Harlem. Take your business to Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens. I don't care. But not here." "With all due respect, Mr. Johnson, that's the old way of thinking," Frank said. "This is the future." "This is your first warning," Bumpy interrupted. "I'm giving it to you out of respect for the work you've done. You're a smart kid. Don't make me give you a second warning." Frank should have listened. Any other man in Harlem would have listened. But Frank Lucas was 35 years old, making more money than he had ever seen, and convinced he was smarter than everyone else. He kept selling. 2 weeks later, Bumpy called Frank again. Same restaurant, same table. This time, Bumpy was not polite. "I told you to stop, Mr. Johnson. I hear you. I respect you, but this is business. I'm not hurting anybody. People are going to buy drugs, whether I sell them or someone else does. At least I'm keeping the money in the community." That last line was a mistake. Bumpy's jaw tightened. "Keeping the money in the community," Bumpy repeated slowly. "Frank, do you know what heroin does? It doesn't just hurt the person using it. It destroys families. It turns mothers into addicts who can't care for their children. It turns young men into thieves and killers. It hollows out neighborhoods from the inside. That's not keeping money in the community. That's burning the community down for profit." "That's their choice," Frank said. "I'm not forcing anybody. You're feeding poison to people who don't know better," Bumpy replied. "And you're doing it in my neighborhood. Your neighborhood." Frank said sharply, "With all respect, Mr. Johnson, you don't own Harlem. Times are changing." "The old rules," Bumpy said quietly, "are the only reason you're still breathing right now." Frank leaned back in his chair. "Is that a threat?" "No, Frank. It's your last warning. Stop now, or you'll regret it." Frank Lucas walked out of the restaurant convinced Bumpy Johnson was finished too old, too soft, too stuck in the past to understand the game had changed. He returned to 116th Street and doubled his operation. Bumpy Johnson did not believe in unnecessary violence. He believed in precision, in knowing exactly where to apply pressure until a system collapsed. Frank Lucas's operation depended on several key elements: suppliers, transportation, distributors, protection, and, above all, trust. If any one of those disappeared, the entire operation would fall apart. Bumpy decided to make all of them disappear. It began on a Monday morning. Frank's main heroin supplier in Thailand was a man named Chen Lee. Chen Lee had a son studying at Columbia University in New York. The son had a gambling problem. He owed money to several bookies who worked for Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy made one phone call. Within 24 hours, all of Chen Lee's son's gambling debts were forgiven, completely erased as a gift with a message: "Bumpy Johnson is a friend of your family." When Chen Lee heard this, he understood immediately. It was a warning disguised as a favor. Bumpy was saying he could reach his family at any time, help them or hurt them, and the choice was his. Chen Lee stopped taking Frank's calls. On Tuesday, Bumpy addressed the transportation problem. Frank was smuggling heroin in the coffins of dead soldiers flown back from Vietnam. It was a brilliant and terrible scheme, but it required cooperation from many people: military officials, mortuary workers, customs agents, all being paid off. Bumpy did not try to pay. He did not pay them more. He did not threaten them. He simply made sure they understood one basic thing: the FBI was watching Frank Lucas, not actively investigating yet, just watching. And anyone connected to Frank's operation would eventually be tied to a federal case. Bumpy had a contact in the bureau, an agent named Turner, who had grown up in Harlem. Turner did not leak classified information. He only began asking casual questions. "You know anything about Frank Lucas? We've been hearing his name." That was enough. The military officials, the mortuary workers, the customs agents, all of them stopped cooperating. The risk was no longer worth it. By Wednesday, Frank could no longer get product into the country. On Thursday, Bumpy dismantled Frank's distribution network. Frank's dealers were young, hungry, and loyal to money, not to Frank. Bumpy sent his people to speak with each dealer. No threats, just information. "You know Frank's supplier disappeared, right? You know the feds are asking about Frank. You know Frank won't be able to protect you when this falls apart." Some dealers quit immediately. Others tried to hold on, but when they saw others walking away, they followed. Within 48 hours, Frank had no one willing to sell for him. By Friday, the money began disappearing. Frank had stash houses across Harlem apartments where he stored cash, product, and weapons. He had been careful. Only his most trusted associates knew the locations. But Bumpy knew people. He knew landlords, building superintendents, neighbors who paid attention. And he knew how to ask questions without asking questions. Bumpy's people did not rob the stash houses. They did not break in. They did not need to. They simply made sure the right information reached the right people. Details about lease violations, fire code problems, and suspicious activity that required investigation. Within a week, police raided 3 of Frank's locations, not because they were targeting Frank directly, but because anonymous tips forced them to act. The cash and drugs were seized as evidence. Frank could not even claim them without incriminating himself. By the following Monday, exactly 1 week after Bumpy had begun, Frank Lucas's entire operation was gone. No suppliers, no transportation, no dealers, no money, no protection. And Bumpy Johnson had not fired a single shot, thrown a single punch, or made a single direct threat. On Tuesday morning, Frank Lucas sat in his apartment, staring at the phone. None of his people were answering. His supplier in Thailand had vanished. His dealers were gone. His stash houses were empty. He had $3,000 in his pocket. A week earlier, he had hundreds of thousands. Now he had enough for a bus ticket. There was a knock at the door. Frank grabbed the gun from his nightstand and approached carefully. "Who is it?" "Delivery." Frank opened the door. A young kid, maybe 16, stood there holding an envelope. "This is for you, Mr. Lucas." Frank took the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with one sentence written in neat handwriting. "You're still breathing. That's your only warning. Leave." There was no signature, but Frank knew who had sent it. That night, Frank Lucas packed a bag, got into his car, and drove south. He told no one where he was going. He did not say goodbye. He simply left. He ended up back in North Carolina, where he had started. He kept a low profile, worked odd jobs, tried to understand what had happened. How had Bumpy Johnson destroyed everything without ever confronting him directly? How had an old man with outdated ideas dismantled a sophisticated drug operation in less than a week? It took Frank 3 years to understand. Bumpy did not win because he was more violent. He won because he understood something Frank did not. Power is not about what you control. It is about what you are connected to. And Bumpy Johnson was connected to everything and everyone in Harlem. Frank Lucas stayed away from Harlem for 3 years. He heard occasional news. Bumpy was still in control. The neighborhood remained stable. There was no heroin epidemic like in other cities. Bumpy's rule held. Then, on July 7th, in 1968, Frank received a phone call. Bumpy Johnson was dead. Frank drove up from North Carolina for the funeral. He stayed in the back, watching hundreds of people pay their respects to a man who ruled Harlem, not through fear, but through respect and intelligence. When the crowd thinned, Frank walked up to the casket. He looked at Bumpy's face, peaceful now. He thought about that lunch at Wells' restaurant, the warnings he had ignored, and the lesson he had learned. Frank knelt and whispered, "I'm sorry. You were right. I was a fool." No one else heard it, but Frank needed to say it. After Bumpy's death, Frank Lucas returned to Harlem. He rebuilt his drug empire, became one of the most powerful dealers in America, and made millions. But he never forgot what Bumpy taught him. He never sold in schools, never targeted children, and always kept some kind of code, some sense of rules. When Frank was finally arrested in 1975, when he sat in prison thinking about his life, he told his lawyer something revealing. The only man he had ever truly feared was Bumpy Johnson, not because of what he did, but because of how he did it. He could destroy you without you ever seeing it coming. That was the lesson. Bumpy Johnson taught Frank Lucas in 1965. Power is not about violence. It is about understanding the system so well that you can dismantle it piece by piece, quietly and efficiently, without anyone realizing what is happening until it is too late. Frank Lucas became famous. Books were written about him. Movies were made about him. But the story they never told was the one Frank whispered at a funeral, the story of how Bumpy Johnson made him disappear for 3 years using nothing but intelligence, connections, and one simple principle: no poison in Harlem. If this story showed you a different side of power, the smart side, the strategic side, hit the like button. Subscribe if you want more Bumpy Johnson stories, because there are many more to come. Leave a comment. Was Bumpy right to force Frank out of Harlem, or should he have let him operate? And make sure to hit the notification bell, because next week is the story of how Bumpy walked into a 5 families meeting unarmed and walked out alive. Remember, the most dangerous man in the room is not the loudest. It is the one who knows exactly which thread to pull to make everything unravel.